Hello. Welcome back to Once Upon a Time with Dr. Jody. This is On the Go Radio, powering the voice of community and change. I'm happy to introduce you to another book buddy. You know, I have lots of book buddies, and Dr. Ashlyn Curry is one of them. Dr. Curry, tell us a little about yourself.
I am excited to be here, Dr. Mongo, to be a part of your Once Upon a Time show. I have been in education for 20 years as an educator, as a first grade teacher, a second grade teacher. And now this upcoming year, I'm going to be a literacy coach. So I'm excited.
All right.
And I would like to share that I am a daughter, a sister, and I have two precious nephews that I enjoy reading to and sharing books with.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And I know that you have a once upon a time story because all of my book buddies have wonderful, they're not only lovers of readers, most of them are writers as well. And I know Dr. Curry is a wonderful writer. And so what's your once upon a time story?
My once upon a time story was when I wrote a story when I started a fire with a group of friends of mine because we were bored one summer and we wanted to build a Michael Jackson clubhouse. So upon us building that Michael Jackson clubhouse, we took out some matches to clear the land and started a fire and ended up burning up someone's garden. So that summer I spent the rest of my summer reading books.
That sounds like quite a once upon a time story, and sometimes our little mishaps really do make interesting reading. And so today we have, as usual, lots of favorite books, and every week, almost every book I pick up is a favorite book.
I have lots of favorites too.
And so last time we were together, we talked about change. We talked about social change, personal change, and we talked about hope and hard work.
Wonderful.
And so this week, to kind of piggyback on that, I want to follow up with change, and change in terms of how the choices we make can influence what's happening both in our personal lives as well as in our communities, and really as well as in the nation. So our theme tonight is Voice Your Choice, books about voting.
Love it.
And one of the first books that I picked up was Change Has Come, an artist celebrates our American spirit. And the drawings were done by a wonderful illustrator and author, Kadir Nelson. And the words are from Barack Obama. President Barack Obama gave this speech. And the beginning of the book is what really speaks to our theme tonight. It starts out on the first page, it says vote with an arrow. And then it says it's the answer told by lines that stretched around schools and churches in numbers this nation has never seen. And just those few lines really captures what the American people did during the 2008 election in terms of getting out to vote. And Kadir Nelson, although the illustrations are small, his pencil illustration really depict lines and lines of people waiting to vote, going in to cast their ballots at the voting machine. But it is this illustration which really gets at and tugs at your heart of an elderly person on a walker making her way over to the voting booth. And so we all recognize that voting is critical, and as citizens of this country, we want to take advantage of our right to vote. Do you remember your first experience voting?
I do remember my first experience voting. I was at Appalachian State University, and I cast my ballot on campus of Appalachian State with a group of my friends, and we were all voting for Bill Clinton at the time.
Okay. So those experiences of the first time voting, you really never forget. And I remember as a child, at our elementary school, my parents would vote. And this particular day, I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, but school was out, and my mother took me into the ballot booth with her. And all I can remember are all these little levers, and she was just clicking and clicking and clicking. And then and they had these huge curtains that they would pull a lever and the curtains would close. And when she first closed us in, a little bit of fear, I think, came into my mind. But once I realized that, and she said, I'm voting, and it may make a little noise, but it's okay. And I can still see that huge voting machine. We've come a long ways. The voting booths may not look the same. You no longer have the curtains, and you no longer click the little buttons, but you certainly are making a difference every time you enter the little small voting booths and cast your ballot. So tonight we have quite a few books to highlight, and all of these books we want to emphasize is that your vote is your voice.
Exactly.
And the characters in some of the books really express how important voting is. One book I have here is Delivering Justice. It's about a gentleman, W.W. Law, and his fight for civil rights. And he lived in Savannah, Georgia, and worked for the post office, but he spent his whole life fighting for civil rights and helping his community to succeed in terms of equality. So this one passage it talks about, and the author is Jim Haskins, and it's illustrated by Benny Andrews. Again, Delivering Justice, W.W. Law, and the Fight for Civil Rights by Jim Haskins and illustrated by Benny Andrews. But he talks about voter schools, 1942, and I was not familiar with voter schools. But he says Wesley knew that many black people didn't vote because they had to pass a test to register. The test was designed to be difficult for black folks to pass. It was intended to keep them from voting. Wesley was a member of the Youth Council of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The Youth Council started a special voter school in the basement of a church. With his friend Clifford, Wesley talked to everyone, even passerbys, about voting. When he found someone who, scared by the test, had never registered to vote, he took them to the voter school. When they felt ready to take the test, Wesley went with them to the courthouse and stayed until they were registered. With Wesley's help and encouragement, many black people in Savannah became registered voters. So, we talk a lot about school in terms of education and academics and the reading, writing, math, and science, but these adults had to attend voter school to prepare for registering to vote.
It's interesting. I would like to share with you about Lillian's right to vote, and it talks about her experience trying to get the knowledge in order to vote. So So I would like to share with you Lydia's Right to Vote. It is by Jonah Winter and Shane W. Evans. Lydia stops in her tracks, unable to keep going. As she stands there, she sees herself trying to register to vote for the very first time. She sees the blank piece of paper on which she must write down a section of the U.S. Constitution, word for word, as it is being mumbled by the registrar, a test she could not pass, and no one could. "Are you going to vote?" she asks the young man who passes her en route. "Yes, ma'am," he answers. "You better," she says, and she means it. Valenian sees the funeral procession for a man named Jimmy Lee Jackson, a 26-year-old shot by a policeman over nothing more than taken apart in a peaceful protest. It is March 1965, and all he wanted was justice and the right to vote. Looking up to the top of the hill, Lillian wonders how she'll ever make it. It looks so far, and she's so tired. Though her feet and legs ache with 100 years of walking, what fuels her ancient body is seeing those 600 people beginning a peaceful protest to march from Selma to Montgomery. People who, though they don't know it yet, will be stopped on a bridge in Selma by policemen with clubs, and all they want is justice and the right to vote. And what's interesting about this book, it shares about Lillian's family's history of them going through, trying the process of vote and going through the voter school, and then ending with this 100-year-old lady having the opportunity to vote and influencing the next generation of young people to get out and vote, thinking about those sacrifices.
Oh, wonderful. And that book reminds me of another book, in fact, that I downloaded on my Kindle today. It's called Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom, My Story of the 1965 Selma Voting Rights March. And it's written, it's a memoir written by Linda Blackman Laurie. So we have Lillian's Right to Vote story about being a part of that Selma March. And then this new book, which was published recently, I think it was published in 2015, Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom by Linda Laurie. So lots of wonderful both picture books as well as chapter books that highlight how African Americans and others work together to ensure that everyone would have the right to vote. We also have this book. It's called Granddaddy's Turn, A Journey to the Ballot Box. And I have to say, I have read it before, but each time I read it, I kind of get emotional because it's so real, and we know that although these books may be historical fiction and the characters may not be real people, may not have been real people, but they're the story, the way that the authors and the illustrators depict what happened during that time really can touch you. This book was written by Michael Bandy and Eric Stein, and is illustrated by James Ranson. And James Ranson was just here in the Detroit area, yes, a few weeks ago. And so his illustrations are certainly dramatic in this book. And it starts out with a grandfather taking his grandson with him to vote, and they're all excited, of course, and grandmother has told them to be careful and to provided them with a camera to take pictures once he's at the voting booth. So it says, when we finally got to the front of the line, my granddaddy proudly signed a paper and was handed a ballot. He clutched the ballot to his chest and said, Son, this is the happiest day of my life. I took the camera from him and said, "Smile, Granddaddy. Now come on, let's go vote," he said. And here's Granddaddy proudly holding his ballot to his chest. But before we could even walk to the voting booth, a deputy stopped us and asked my granddaddy, "What are you doing, Uncle?" Where we lived, if the white folks didn't know your name, they usually called you either Uncle or George, or Auntie if you were a lady. "I'm voting today, sir," my granddaddy replied. The deputy got out a big, thick book and slammed it on the table. He opened it to a page with words that looked longer than crabfish. "Can you read this, Uncle?" the deputy asked. My granddaddy just stared at the pages and shook his head. "No, sir, I can't," he replied. The deputy slammed the book shut, saying, "Well, Uncle, if you can't read this, then you can't vote." He tore up my granddaddy's ballot and threw it on the ground.
Wow.
I was pretty sure that man wasn't playing by the rules, but he was in charge. I could see my granddaddy was mad. Oh, emotions must have been welling up, because even today in 2017 it still gets to me. And when you think about some of the voting suppression that was going on then, in many ways it may take a different form, but it's happening in some communities.
Indeed, again, with the Voters ID Act that's coming up, that they have to have a photo, which most of the time when you think about poor people and people of color, they might not have those voter identification. Right,
absolutely. And so we have to really be aware that there are certainly ways that we can support some of our neighbors and family members who may have their votes suppressed as well today. As we headed back down the road toward home, my granddaddy didn't say a word, but I saw something I'd never seen before. My big, strong granddaddy had tears in his eyes. "Don't worry, Granddaddy. I'll vote for you one day," I said to him. Granddaddy passed away before he ever had a chance to vote. I never forgot that day he tried to vote. My granddaddy was so mad he might have lost his temper, but he knew better than how important that day was. Even though it wasn't his time to vote that day, he looked to the future. When I went to vote for the first time, I remember what my granddaddy always said: "Patience, son, patience." He was right. The day finally came, and I knew that just like my granddaddy, I would never take it for granted. With his picture in my hand, I put my ballot in the box, smiled, and said to myself, "Now it's Granddaddy's turn."
Wow.
So, we know about the many civil rights activists who really, lost their lives for the right to vote, and how, many people were turned away, and just to know that people continue to fight for the right to vote.
And the struggle and the importance of us making sure that we do not take this opportunity for granted. When you shared that book about Granddaddy's Turn, made me think about this book, Granddaddy's Gift. And this book is by Margaret King Mitchell and illustrated by Larry Johnson. And it is, too, it's about a grandfather and the little girl trying to vote. The father has gone to voter school. He's passed the test. And because of the excitement of it, they were planning on having a celebration. But as the father drives home, he noticed that a part of the church is in flames. It says the news spread quickly that Granddaddy was now a registered voter. That night, we all got in the truck and headed to church. There was going to be a big celebration, and as we drove up, we could see bright orange flames shooting up against the dark sky. After the church burned down, people's fear turned into determination, and more men and women came forward to register to vote. I understood why Granddaddy had wanted me to go to school. I never skipped school again, and even if we did have raggedy butts. On my 18th birthday, when I went to register to vote, Granddaddy came with me. I didn't have to take a test on the Constitution. I just had to fill out a card with my name, my address, and my date of birth. Now I could vote and make my own voice heard. Granddaddy had taught me to stand up for things, even if I was scared, and always to be proud. His gift never left me. At the top of the courthouse's steps, Granddaddy took my hand. We had come a long way, and we still had a long way to go. And I want you to just capture that image of the grandfather and the little girl, just showing you that next generation. You see that same thing in Lillian's right to vote. You see the same thing in Granddaddy's turn.
Yes.
That whole generation of us realizing the sacrifices that our ancestors did for us to have that right to vote and not to take it for granted.
Absolutely. And as I think about voting, I don't think I've ever missed an election. And I've been voting a lot longer than you. But voting has always been so important in our family. And we call one another. We remind each other, don't forget to vote. Sometimes it's 7:30, and I'm texting my brothers and saying, did you vote? Make sure you get out to vote. So we all can help each other remember to get out, and in our area, voting will be this Tuesday, August 8th, the primary election. So please, folks, and you've heard this from a lot of people, I'm sure, over the years, but a lot of people have died and suffered tremendous loss in order for us to have the right to vote. So I encourage you not only to share the different books with your youngsters about voting, but to make it a family event. You know, that opportunity to go with my mother as a young child really left a lasting impression on me. So, you know, help your children, start early teaching your children the importance of voting. This is On the Go Radio, powering the voice of community and change, and we're happy that you've joined us. Another book, which is a newly released book by a local author, David Watkins. He's written several picture books, and this is his first chapter book. And the title is Melvia for Mayor. And this young girl is the model they use for the cover is a member of his church.
Wow.
And so she's a beautiful young lady, and she is depicting Melvia, a very intelligent youngster, middle schooler, who discovers a loophole in the city charter so that she can run for mayor at the younger age of 12. And it reminds me of the young lady we just listened to, Kennedy Alford. I could see Kennedy in this role and running for mayor. Very bright youngsters. So I'm going to just share, this is near the end of the book, share a snippet, and I don't want to give away the ending because I encourage you, and I'll give you information for how you can purchase David's book at the end of the show. Melvia for mayor. Neither the mayor nor Mr. Meadows had the last word. The voters did. After the results were counted, the Wednesday paper showed that the mayor had won over 50% of the vote. Melvia had 45% of the vote, and the third place candidate received about 4% of the vote. And so that's the primary. They were getting down to the top two candidates. Our friend Hashtag had only 3 votes. 3 votes? I almost beat her, and I wasn't even on the ballot. I guess she said hashtag this and hashtag that too often for anyone to really take her seriously. Somebody suggested that we have a celebration at the library, but we would have had to limit ourselves to whispering cheers and high fives. So everyone gathered across the street at Kenya's house for a party. The Kool-Aid was flowing and a good time was had by all. Kenya's parents, who probably voted for hashtag, seemed to be actually happy for Melvia. Hashtag sent her congratulations by text. She had to study for a college exam that was coming up in 3 months. My journal had about 1 million entries concerning Melvia's journey. I don't even write about anything else anymore. Why should I? What could be more exciting than my girl running for mayor? Well, maybe seeing a headline that says Melvia wins. It was the first week of September, and I was attending a new school. I didn't know my schedule. I didn't know where my classroom was. I didn't even know where to sit once I found my class. I was so used to sitting next to Melvia that I felt lost without her being at school. I was actually standing at the back of the room waiting for her to show up before the teacher made me take a seat. The plan was for Melvia to be homeschooled this semester so that she could spend time on her mayoral campaign. However, knowing Melvia's mother, I felt that Melvia would have had more free time in high school. I thought, so this is high school. I'm not impressed. I passed by the gym. Sure, it had basketball hoops, a state-of-the-art weightlifting area, gymnastic mats, and a second-story track. I didn't see any dodgeballs, though. The science lab had the usual test tubes, burners, droppers, cylinders, and a telescope. I mean, who needs to see Mars as if it were next door? I don't need alien neighbors. Okay, I was a little impressed, but that was just the first day. They wanted us to be impressed. That's how they get you. The second day was really something. The 9th graders were treated like celebrities. The senior class honor students talked to the freshmen and gave a tour of the school. Even the lunch was special. It was catered by none other than Melvia's dad's restaurant. The food was delicious, so I heard. I never tasted it. Lunchtime was at 12 noon, and I had gotten kicked out of school at 11:05. So Melvia's friend is telling the story, and it is really a fun piece. And so you'll definitely want to get the book Melvia for Mayor by David Watkins. And you can go to their website. It's www.dlwpublishing.com. Again, www.dlwpublishing.com. And that's Melvia for Mayor by David L. Watkins. So we are just excited about the prospects of the new generation, the millenniums coming into the voting community and really helping to get their voices heard.
Right, and engaging the community is one of those powerful aspects of the young millennium students.
Right. And I have a little poem that I would like to share. It's by Joy AC, and it's called Election Day. Today is Election Day. Get out and vote. The advertisements all say you can vote red, you can vote blue. Voting is something we all should do. This is our freedom. Don't throw it away. Please go vote this election day. And I would certainly, as a classroom teacher, be teaching my youngsters that little poem to help encourage them. And some schools do have mock elections.
Yes, we do.
And tell us a little bit about some of the ways that teachers can encourage students to be a part of civil engagement.
Well, one of the ways that teachers can do is certainly share some of these awesome books that we share with our listeners today. Spending time making the ballot box and giving the opportunity to vote, just like what they would like for lunch, or having the opportunity to vote with the next read aloud book to read. So some opportunities like that where you just don't make the choices for the kids, but give them an opportunity to make a choice and give them the opportunity to vote.
Oh, absolutely. And so our theme today, Voice Your Choice, books about voting. And like Dr. Curry indicated, there are lots of ways we can engage children in making choices, having some decision making. So when it's time for them to engage with the voting process, they are more than adept at making decisions and making informed choices. So one of the quotes, and there are quite a few that I like. One was the first one we talked about was your vote is your voice. But another one that I think is really important is if you don't vote, you lose the right to complain.
Exactly.
And so we're living at a time when we, in January there was lots of protests around our new administration in Washington, D.C. And so there were many people saying folks didn't get out and vote like they should have. And so we want to see, remember that first book we shared, Change Has Come, where the illustrator Kadir Nelson depicted long lines of people voting that occurred when President Obama ran in 2008. So we want to always see those long lines at the voting booths and at the polling locations, so that we want encourage everyone to please get out and vote. That is your civic responsibility. And share some of these wonderful pieces of literature with your youngsters. This is Once Upon a Time with Dr. Jody, and my special guest today is Dr. Ashlyn Curry. And this is On the Go Radio, powering the voice of community and change. And when we say change, we really mean change.
Let's make it happen.
Yes. So please get out and vote next Tuesday and again in November for the general election. And we look forward to having you again next week on Once Upon a Time with Dr. Jody.